Welcome to this interview for What Happens Next. I'm your host, Chris Dames, and What Happens Next is the channel, as you probably know if you've seen a few of our videos, dedicated to really exploring with a bit of nuance the areas that you need to think about if you're in your 50s and 60s and you're thinking about change in your life. And we explore some really interesting topics. One of my favourites that we've recently published is a professor of sleep who was talking about how we can sleep better. Because even though my day job involves me building people's financial plans, actually, what I'm really interested in doing, if you're going through that period of your life, is supporting you with well-being in all areas. And that's what Happens Next is all about. It's making sure that we help you, support you to live a life well lived, whatever that means to you, but looking at that through a framework of well-being. And there's a few ways that we can help for free, for no cost to you. Number one, you can visit our website at www.whathappensnext.life, where you can get access to a range of different free content. Number one, the one that I'd recommend, and the one that was really insightful for a lot of people who have told us that it's insightful, is the What Happens Next quiz. Because what that allows you to do is look at where you are from a well-being perspective and see where you might want to make improvements. I know, and I built the quiz, it was quite insightful for me as well. So yeah, please do use the free resources and like this video if you get value, and please make sure you subscribe to the YouTube channel. Now, one of the interesting things that I'm finding with a lot of my clients at the minute is they're in a sandwich, and they're in a sandwich between kids who are coming into adulthood or already adults who are remaining independent, and parents who are needing their help and support. And today's interview with Emily Sharp, is all about that particular subject. Emily, how are you today?
Chris, it's so lovely to be on your show, on your podcast, on your video. Thank you so much for the invitation. I'm thrilled to be here. I will say I took your quiz, and speaking of sleep, that is where I scored the lowest because I have a 3-year-old and he was up at 3 o'clock in the morning. So hopefully I'm functioning as well as I can.
But what's interesting with that? I mean, you know what? It was a fascinating interview. As we record this, I don't think that's out yet. But really, and this is one of the benefits of being able to do these interviews, Emily, I get to learn loads too. And the interview with Dr. Neil Stanley, who was the sleep guy, felt by the end all about how I can improve my own sleep as opposed to, but yeah, loads and loads of value on that one. And a fascinating subject that I think we could all do with learning a bit more about, I think. So yeah, it's good. What's it like having a 3-year-old? Mine's 13 and 21 now. So what's it like having a 3-year-old?
Oh, he's great. He has a very strong personality. I wonder where he got that from. And it's such a pleasure to get to learn from him and learn about him. I heard a great quote the other day that when we become parents, we are, rather than saying, for example, if you're a mother, you are not the child is not your child. You are the mother of that child, meaning that you are raising them to go out in the world and help them to be the person they're going to be. So I try to take on that perspective.
It's so interesting because a lot of my clients, and currently Cassie and I are going through this at the minute, is trying to manage that changing dynamic. Because with a daughter who's 21, I mean, we've still we've still got a 13-year-old with us. What I've realised is they're only on loan. You know, your job is to actually prepare them for the outside world. And I think part of the challenge, and I talk to my clients about this all the time, is how that can have a real impact on identity when they leave. So we'll talk a lot about that, I'm sure, identity and how we manage that within the family dynamic today. So without further ado, tell us a little bit about you.
Sure. My name is Emily Sharp. As you can probably tell, listeners, by my accent, I am not from the UK. I'm American, originally raised in Connecticut and Michigan, so East Coast and the Midwest. And I am the founder and CEO of Guiding Generations, which is a service that helps people manage their parents' care from a distance. Yeah. And I come to this venture from a background in law and public policy and social impact. So I trained as a human rights lawyer in the States. I worked for many years in global privacy policy at Facebook, and later led public policy here in the UK at the Web Foundation, where I focused on making the internet more accessible and equitable. But after going through the challenges of long distance caregiving for my own parents, and by the way, we can talk about what the definition of caregiving is, because I take a very broad view on that. But after starting to think about my own parents' care, who they're back in the States, I saw a really big gap in support for families like mine, especially people who are juggling life in one country, including potentially with children or other ongoing care obligations in the country where you live, while managing aging parents in another country. And that's what led me to start Guiding Generations.
Yeah. So tell me a little bit about that experience with your mum and dad.
Sure. I think as it comes to a fair number of people, as I was getting married to my now husband and thinking about having children, you start to think about being responsible, getting your own estate planning done, your wills, your power of attorney, et cetera. Not everyone does, but if you do, it starts the wheels turning. Yeah. And you start to think about your own legacy, caring for your own children, and then you start to think about your own parents. And at the same time, you might see your parents in need of a bit more support. And I think especially when you do live so far away, many time zones, a lot of administrative hurdles, which I'll talk about later in connecting with your parents who live abroad. By necessity, you have to plan ahead and you have to think about these things in advance. I also happen to be a type A planner sort of person. And being a lawyer by background, I think about consequences. I think about what happens if you don't plan in advance. And as much as I like to plan, I put the question to myself, Emily, if something were to happen to mom or dad, do you actually have their neighbor's contact information? Yeah. Do you know the list of medications they're on? You know they have a will, but actually, do you know where original copies are? All of these, certainly, this is not to precipitate a crisis or think about worst case scenario, but two things are certain in life, right? Death and taxes. And we do have to think about them. Not everyone does. My mind was working in that way. Yeah. And so when I thought about how to have these conversations with my parents, I'm very lucky that we have a pretty direct communication style in my family. Not everyone does. We do. And so I said to my mom and dad, let's talk about it. So I flew home about 2 years ago, sat down around the kitchen table with them and my brother. And in about 3 days, we went from soup to nuts: financial planning, estate planning, broad questions like, if something were to happen to you, mom, dad, where would you want to live? Do you want to come live with one of us? Do you want to age in place at home? What does quality of life look like to you in the next 10 to 15 years? And how can we do what we can to support you in living the best quality life? So we were able to have those conversations. But as I was doing research to prepare for this trip, there wasn't the type of information and the support, especially not collated in one place, that I would have liked to see.
Yeah, no, and building that's been really, I know that building that and building the framework so you can support people has been part of what you've been doing more recently. Now, you mentioned something really interesting earlier about a broad definition of looking after parents and a broad. Talk to me about what's included in that for you and your mum and dad.
Sure. If you ask most people who are what I would define or who are caregivers, if you ask them, do you consider yourself a caregiver? many of them will say no, especially men, interestingly, especially younger men. I define caregiving as, and many people do, as anything that really touches on support for a loved one or support for someone who needs some help. That could be as kind of theoretically small as checking to make sure that they have their estate planning done, or talking to them about their finances. It doesn't have to be the traditional definition of what we think of sitting by a bedside and administering medicine or changing bed sheets. It certainly includes that, but it can be a much broader definition. And so when I think about being a long distance caregiver for my parents, I think about working with them, working alongside them to help ensure I do what I can to make sure they have the best quality of life over the next 10 to 15 years.
And I'd imagine long distance then creates its own challenges, right? Because there's some stuff you're not going to be able to do because you're there, because you're not there.
Absolutely.
How does that fit? And again, we'll talk a little bit about the services you provide in a minute, but in terms of the relationship you've got with mum and dad, does that apply to making sure they've got any care that they actually need on the ground, or is research from afar quite difficult?
That's a great question. In the States, well, I'll start with thinking about my parents. Knock on wood, my parents are overall very healthy and well. They're very proactive about their medical care, which is not the case for all older adults. So they go to the doctor, they take care of themselves. So in terms of medical, physical health care, they're doing great. They keep us updated. There's a lot of transparency, a lot of communication, and I really applaud them for that. At some point, they will likely need more care. And so that is something that I'm certainly thinking about putting into place. I'm very lucky that I have a brother who lives 4 hours away by car. And that's something maybe we can talk about later on. For those of us who have siblings, we have a good enough relationship, thinking about how you split up in an equitable way the caregiving for your parents is really important. And I've actually thought about creating a kind of a bespoke product around sibling summits, how you can work with your siblings to have intentional conversations about supporting your parents, because often, and I found myself doing this with my own brother, you end up having, because you're both busy, he has 2 kids, I have a child, you end up having kind of snippets of text conversations and catch each other on the fly. Oh, mom said this the other day, dad said that. But how can you sit down together as sibling groups and talk through, okay, Susie lives 5 miles away from mom and dad, and she is a nurse. Great. She can go check up on them and do whatever. Bob lives thousands of miles away, but has more financial resources. Maybe he can pay for certain, medical necessities that aren't covered through health insurance. There are many different ways that we can all caregive and help. And I'm lucky that my brother lives close by. He's very practical. He's very responsive. He's also not a planner like I am. So I can help on the planning side of things from a distance, and he can help with the more in-person stuff.
I mean that's interesting. We'll explore a little bit about how to support parents where the communication isn't as clear. But it sounds like in your family, you've got this brilliant mix of different skills, but also the ability to communicate about them. What I also love, Emily, is the fact that you say 4 hours isn't that far away. I could probably drive to Manchester or Liverpool in that period of time. So it feels like, 4 hours is just really close. So tell me specifically. So if you've got aging parents who might need some additional care and help, what does Guiding Generations actually do?
Sure. So we provide hands-on support for people who are working through the complexities of elder care, especially from a distance. So if you're living away from your elderly parents, we help you plan for, which is very important, and stay on top of their care. So that includes managing medical needs, finances, handling home maintenance, or legal and estate planning matters. what I do is I provide my clients with personalized plans. So we agree on what they want to discuss first with their parents, how they can get the conversations going. Once they get started, it's actually incredible to see how quickly the puzzle pieces start to fall into place. And very happily, my clients' stress levels do seem to go down pretty quickly. And that's something hopefully we can cover again, getting over that initial barrier and resistance and avoidance of getting into some of these tough subjects. Many of my clients are busy, really busy professionals who really want to show up for their elderly parents, but they're feeling overwhelmed, especially by trying to handle everything remotely. And so I want to help give them peace of mind, coaching them through the planning, the logistics of caregiving, so they can really focus on the relationship with their parents rather than constant problem solving, firefighting, crisis management. I like to say that, you know, every generation and every individual who goes through this, who starts to see their parents starting to slow down, or there's a crisis moment where mom has fallen and needs to go to hospital, we can often feel that this is an intensely personal and lonely experience. Like we're just starting from scratch.
Yeah.
And then when you start to scratch the surface, you actually see there's a huge amount of information to take in, especially thinking about complex legal and financial decisions, affording care for our parents, making the right healthcare decisions, ensuring they're doing the right estate planning, and on and on and on. It can feel sometimes like it requires a master's degree to start to feel like you're getting a handle on how to make informed choices on all of these issues. And so I work with my clients to try to break down some of these big decisions into manageable steps. And I help people move forward, hopefully with less stress and fewer mistakes. So it's a very bespoke, tailored service where I work with each client's individual circumstances. And the biggest value add I think I give them is, number one, putting a plan in place. So my clients often talk about feeling anchored. Once they have the plan in place, they know what the next steps are and what the priorities are, whether it's sorting out getting their parents hearing aids, getting them a financial planner, getting their power of attorney documents done. And then it's also about providing that shortcut. So I've done the heavy lifting on doing the research around what you need to know, so they don't have to go and do that on their weekends, on their, you know, their late evenings. I can serve it to them, as it were, and give them the opportunity to digest it without having to do all the research from scratch.
I think often, and you'll have more insight into this than I will, Emily, helping mum and dads often feels like quite an overwhelming project. Like, where do you start with all of this sort of stuff? So actually breaking it down into bite-sized chunks is really important, because it's just all it is step by step then, isn't it? And do you facilitate the support of taking the action, or is that then given back to the kids or mum and dad to actually take the action as well, or can you support with that too?
It's really interesting, Chris. I originally anticipated that I'd be doing more hands-on work and kind of managing that relationship, but the vast majority of my clients have met with me one time, a few times. We've gone through some of the more important topics. I create the personalized plan for them, and it's like the floodgates open in a positive way.
Yeah.
I have one client who I might talk about her example a bit later. Very bright. She's a lawyer herself. She knows what to do, but she almost needed an accountability partner at her started. She needed someone to help share the emotional burden and also give her some tips and do the research so she didn't have to. And once we got started, and this is very typical, once we got started, within a week, she sent me an email saying, we've met with his estate attorney. He's finalizing his power of attorney documents. We've looked at retirement communities in Florida for him. He's agreed to do X, Y, and Z. And this is not about controlling or strong-arming parents. It's about working with them. But it was really, that's a great example of how many of my clients have used this as an opportunity to get the ball rolling, because it has been brewing in the back of their minds for weeks, months, years. Well, and they just need permission to get started.
Your service is an unusual isn't unlike ours in that regard, because sometimes what clients want us for is the nudge. So they want us to make sure that we are, yes, doing the work and helping them, build their financial plan. And it's interesting because this week I've had two elements of the job come to real prominence that I often don't think about. Number one is the nudge. So and again, we typically work with fairly affluent, wealthy people who are really good at what they do, and they just need some help getting the basics right sometimes. Like, have you done that will? Have you done that power of attorney? Have you made sure? And the interesting thing, and I've had 3 clients at the moment, and funny enough, we're doing a video for What Happens Next on this coming up, is, and it sounds weird to say, because who am I to give this, is permission to spend. So we've got 3 clients at the minute who are on the cusp of stopping work. And they've all come in and said, look, can we just clarify that financial plan? Just let's double, triple, and quadruple check to make sure that before I press any button, we're going to be okay. And funny enough, the video that I'm recording next on What Happens Next is the 3 things you can do to make sure that you're ready to push that button before you do it. So it's a real interesting one. One thing that I'm curious about in terms of the services you provide as well, Emily, is that element of support to provide a degree of independence from the dynamic of the relationship between mum and dad. So how do you find that? Because I'd imagine that because this is your bag and this is what you do, it might be easier for you to have some of those conversations than the kids with mum and dad. Does that turn out to be true or not?
My primary goal is to help empower people to have those conversations with their parents, because they have had a lifelong relationship with their parents. And although I'm happy to stick around and support for years, I think realistically, it is about helping my clients build the skills to have those sometimes not as difficult as you would think, conversations with their parents. And so I am happy to support. I'm happy to step in, as it were, and be on the phone, or even identify others who can help facilitate those conversations. So, for example, I have a client who found out her parents are not doing as well financially as she originally had hoped. And so I've been doing research to help identify the right financial professionals who will help have those conversations, but also from a technical perspective. I also encourage clients to think through, are there other people in their parents' lives who could help be part of the conversation?
Yeah, so who's in the support?
Like an aunt, an uncle, a religious figure in their lives, someone who's trusted, who's competent to help have some of the tougher conversations, especially if it's around philosophical conversations around death, fragility, mortality. But there are often really creative ways of having those conversations that we don't think about until we get some of those suggestions.
I think that's a really interesting point you raised there, because we think about often who, and again, I know that I can tell you're a planner, because that document that you very kindly shared with me had loads of stuff that I hadn't thought about. But the interesting element is who's on your team to help mum and dad that isn't a professional, but might be a member of the community, and might be, because that can all add a lot of value. But I'd imagine that the process of going through this is a challenging one. As you say, it involves some difficult conversations. And tell me a little bit about the other challenges. Adult children, the clients like mine, and people in their 50s and 60s with mum and dad getting a bit older, the challenges they face when supporting their aging parents, particularly when there's a distance involved.
Sure. Frankly, I think one of the hardest things is people. I think this somewhat answers your question, but people wait until there's a crisis.
Yeah.
And that is a really hard time to make level-headed decisions about what to do next. Because as we know, all the research, all the psychological studies show us that when our brain is under stress, we don't make the best decisions. And so most people only start going down this road until there is a crisis. As I mentioned, maybe mom has fallen and ends up in hospital, or there's a financial crisis. There's a discovery that actually the assets we thought were there were not there. And how do we pay for long-term care?
Yeah.
There can be a range of crises that occur. And so not having the conversations in advance means that when you're planning in crisis, the costs will go up because your options are often more limited, or you're willing to overpay to solve the crisis. There's obviously incredible stress. It can upend many aspects of your life. So honestly, one of the biggest challenges is waiting until there's a crisis. And why do we wait? Because these topics are inherently hard. And they're also inherent to the aging process. We can't avoid them. Issues around frailty, death, money, property, family dynamics. These are inherently hard conversations to have. So the biggest challenge that most people face is just initiating the conversation. So topics that I talked about in the beginning, conversations I had with my parents. So mom and dad, do you prefer to age here at home, or are you open to looking at other options? What does quality of life look like for you in the next few years? If something were to happen to you and you can't make medical decisions for yourselves, who do you want to make those decisions on your behalf? We need to talk about your driving. That's a big one.
It's so interesting though, isn't it? Because you think about that, and I'm thinking about my dad now, and he doesn't drive. He's 76, so he's not that old, but he doesn't drive anymore. But for him, driving equaled independence. And there's a real identity connection between that change in ability and capability to the person you're starting to become. And it's emotional, right? It's not only a logical conversation. It's one of these things where, so here's what I'm curious about, because these are all really important points. But starting that conversation is the bit that's, as you, I can't remember the quote, but it's that element. No, it's the Atomic Habits guy who's got a really great quote that talks about the hardest part of doing a workout is actually getting your trainers on and going to the gym, right? Absolutely. So what's our version of getting our trainers on and going to the gym when we're starting this conversation with our parents? What do we need to start with?
I will answer that. And I want to preface it just by acknowledging that we are not taught how to have these conversations. Just as people who are aging are not really taught to have an emotional connection with that aging process and what it means for them to go through the process, we're also not taught how to have those conversations with our parents, and aging parents are not taught how to have conversations with their adult children. As the mother of a young child right now, I'm absolutely bombarded with mostly high quality resources around child development and how to connect with your toddler and what a tantrum really means and how to develop a secure attachment. All very, very important. We are not given the equivalent education.
It's true.
To have these conversations with our aging parents or with any older adults who are going through themselves this very complex physical, cognitive, emotional change of aging. Yeah. So how do we start to have these conversations? Resistance is completely normal. No one likes to talk about these topics: aging, money, what happens if they get sick. There's fear and denial about aging and mortality. There are cultural taboos talking about death, especially in pronounced in certain cultures in particular. Big sensitivity around role inversion, right? Parent, child. There's overwhelm, there's complexity. The number one thing that I say to people is start small and start early. Instead of saving it all up for a big, we need to talk conversation, try to bring it up in smaller chunks. Know that this is going to take probably many conversations. And that's okay, because actually we want to develop the muscle, the skill set of having these conversations woven into the fabric of our lives, that we want to be able to have a fluid conversation over time. So it's okay. Start small, start early. I want to first actually start. I want to talk by. I'm going to start by talking about the when. So when to have and when not to have conversations. Then I'll get into the how. Number one, when everyone ideally is relaxed and emotions aren't running high. Before a crisis hits, as I mentioned earlier. So if you can, before a crisis hits, ideally. Interestingly, not during the holidays, which can pose extra problems for people who live far away from their parents, because often that's the only time that we are around our parents. It's Christmas, Easter, in the US, Thanksgiving, or other kind of holiday moments. That's a time when, frankly, we want to be making memories. We want to be relaxing. There are often kids or other family members around. It's not an ideal time. If it's your only time, go for it. But if it's if you can find other times, try to do that.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's helpful to speak after a life event. So it could be another relative who's passed or a family friend who's passed, and in a gentle and organic way to try to use that as an opportunity to open the conversation. I also talk about targeting the right time of day. As people start to age, we typically have more energy in the morning than in the afternoon. And so trying to target kind of a post-breakfast conversation can be a useful time.
Yeah.
And so, the thing that has worked best for me and my family, especially being at a distance, is starting to keep open lines of communication. And by that, I mean scheduling weekly or monthly calls. So my mom and I now have a weekly call on the calendar, and I try to respect it like as if it were a business meeting. It used to be Tuesdays. We're moving it now to Thursdays. Thursdays, 4:00 my time. We have that time scheduled. Whatever we need to talk about. Sometimes I talk about my business. She talks about her work, but it could be a range of topics, and just getting that kind of touch point that just allows the space for your parents and you to bring up what you want to bring up. That can be a really, really useful around the when. I'll pause there. I have some more ideas on the how, but I'll pause there to see if you have any questions.
No, I love that. I love that. One thing that springs to mind is that conversation about a life well lived, because in that generation, like in that sort of age group, my clients are in their 50s and 60s typically, and we've got clients who are older in their 70s and 80s. My experience is that perception of a life well lived in our 50s and 60s and what we want to do in that period of our lives changes over time. So talk to me about your experience of working with clients and having conversations with your own mum and dad about what that looks like for them, and how did you get to a point where you understood that?
What comes up a lot with my clients, the adult children, is they will want to encourage and sometimes pressure their parents to stop working. And that includes me and my parents. My parents are still working, and they're in their mid to late 70s. I've had clients who've said, my parents have been operating this restaurant and they work 6 or 7 days a week. I just want them to be able to stop and retire. Because we equate retirement with leisure and less stress and the opportunity to enjoy life. And it's interesting, during one of your recent podcast interviews, you spoke about with your guest about kind of phased. It's not black or white, right? There can be a phased approach to thinking about next steps and what happens next.
The reason these channels called What Happens Next, Emily, and not How to Retire Successfully, is because actually I don't think retirement's for everybody. I don't think that when I reach the stage where I'm thinking about it, it's going to be for me. I think what we probably need to do, and I'd love your thoughts on this, is just have more nuanced conversations. And I did an interview with a guy called John Dunkley that was really, really insightful for me, because we were talking about what the Greeks perceived, in the ancient Greeks perceived as well-being. And I really love this definition of it, because what we think about in retirement is we've got plenty of time for hedonistic pleasures, right? We're going to go on holiday, we're going to go out for lunch, we're going to do all the stuff we love and like because we've had this period of time where we've worked really hard. But actually, as humans, we've got three main areas of well-being that we need to feel. Hedonism, I'm going to really butcher the Greek on this one, Emily. I'm so bad. Eudaimonism, which is all about sense of purpose, getting up. What do we do when we get up in the morning? And then Chaironic well-being, which is all about what gives us awe. What we ignore sometimes when we encourage our parents, or we're thinking about just stopping dead, is where do we get the middle bit? Where do we get the eudaimotic well-being? What do you think?
Well, so that's exactly the tension that often arises. Adult children believe they're being well-meaning by encouraging or pressuring their parents to stop working. But for many people, especially in the baby boomer generation, and many of my clients have baby boomer parents, they're not their entire identity, but a good chunk of their identity is wrapped up in their work and their career and their professional identities. So if they were to stop, they will not know who they are anymore. What they're, rather, that's not, I think that's an overstatement, but I think to your point about what is their purpose? What will they get up and do every day? I've asked my father this, I hope he doesn't mind that I share, but I asked him when I flew home 2 years ago and sat around the kitchen table, Dad, what would you do if you weren't working? And his initial reaction was, I don't know. Of course, then further in the conversation, we get to all of the projects he'd like to do at home. He's a big DIY, tinkerer and loves fixing things and creating projects. So he would absolutely have plenty to do. I think my point, and the point that many people are trying to get at, is I would like for you to get to a place where you have choice and independence around how much you'd like to work. So maybe you still work, maybe it's a blend. So you work 3 days a week or 2 days a week, but then you have a day a week to see your grandchildren. You have a day a week to pursue a hobby or some other interest. So it's about actually encouraging choice and independence rather than having to still show up 9 to 5 every day and not having the space for those other aspects of your identity and your personality.
And this is what fascinates me about this stuff, because the way that you approached it with your dad is from a position of curiosity instead of a position of I know best. And I think that's what we've got to do, right? We've got to actually engage that curious conversation and explore a lot of the things. But what I loved when we had our last conversation, thank you for sending that through, by the way, is that brilliant planning document you've built to help your clients plan really well. Can you tell me a bit about what's included in that document for our viewers, and what bits surprise clients the most when they go, I didn't think of that?
Absolutely. So Chris, you're referring to what I call my ultimate aging parent checklist and planner. And I'm actually, as I mentioned to you, I'm in the process of turning it into a digital product so people can go through and fill it out online. And this is just between the client and myself. So it's, it's a private document, but it's a way of making it a bit easier to fill out and go through. It covers what I hope is a pretty comprehensive set of topics. So it ranges from finances, estate planning, medical planning, healthcare planning, et cetera. But I think there are a number of other topics that people don't always think about. And again, I think we avoid it because these topics in particular touch on, well, similar to estate planning, these are legacy topics. So thinking about if something bad were to happen, do you have these things in place? For example, passwords and online accounts. We all have so many passwords these days. On our phones, we have our passcode, we have our email passwords, we have passwords for our medical portals, our bank accounts, et cetera, and for those who bank online. and not having access to some of that information. There are other routes to get that information through power of attorney or other methods, but it can make it much harder if you don't have the password. So getting those in order in a way that is equally secure, right? So not sending them over email, and find there are digital vaults that you can use to share information like that, but that can be a huge one. Oftentimes, at least having the phone passcode can help, because that can be a portal to many things. These seem like small things, but these actually can be, going back to the question around how you start the conversation. The next things I'm going to mention can be useful, low-hanging fruit to get into some of the bigger topics. So my parents, for example, are big pet people. They have 2 beloved dogs. So if your parents are the same, you might say, gosh, if Fluffy ever needed some extra care, if you were kind of away for a few days, or maybe just incapacitated or in hospital, choose the right wording, and Fluffy needed help, just remind me kind of how much food does she eat in the morning, who's the vet, kind of use that low-hanging fruit before you get to the much bigger conversations. You can equally talk about who mows the lawn, who has a spare key, some of those smaller topics that again can start to open up the scarier topics that we often avoid.
And it's interesting, for our Savello clients, we've actually got a digital vault we provide as part of the service, because we recognize how important having that, what I want the kids of our clients to do if anything happens to them is just phone us, so that we can act then as that resource to go, here's what you need to consider, here's what you need to do, and here's what you need to look at. I've got to tell you this story, Emily. My dad has got a parrot. So he's got a dog, and he's a big hulking guy from East London who used to work in the docks all of his life, and he's got the tiniest dog in the world. It looks a bit strange, I've got to be honest, but he's also got this parrot. And parrots, apparently, I don't know a lot about them, live for quite a long time. And last time we were over there, he said, well, I've been thinking about this, Chris, and who's going to look after my parrot? And before he said the word parrot, my wife, Cassie, went, definitely not. But it's interesting, isn't it? Because you look at that with that nuance, and how many things worry our parents that they go, oh, what would happen to Fluffy or my dad's, if something happened, where actually you could really think about that. The other bit that I love, and I know you're a planner because I do this, and I spend all my days planning. I'm a natural optimist in life. I've been really fortunate to do what I do. I live very optimistically. I always think the best in people. But actually, professionally, I'm a real pragmatist. Mm-hmm. So what we do when we build clients' plans is we plan for the best, prepare for the best, and then plan for the worst. So it's like all of those what ifs. What if this goes wrong? What if that goes wrong? And then look at the actions we can take to mitigate if that stuff happens. Okay. That's what you're doing with your service, right? You're looking at that. Well, look, if everything goes great and some things are going to be inevitable and we need to plan for, but actually, what do we need to think about so that we're fully prepared in an effort, I think, to make it less stressful when it does occur.
Absolutely.
That's where my head is at with that. So I've told a story not related to financial planning, but about my dad's parrot. What I'd like for you to do is share a story about the work that you've done with clients and how it's had a positive impact on their lives.
Sure. There are 2 in particular I wanted to mention. The first is actually a very positive story. And again, it kind of echoes this opening the floodgates opportunity that even initiating the conversation can have. So working with a client, parents are separated, but still kind of have a lot of financial and healthcare overlap. There's still those connections. And her mother is an indirect communicator. will not have these conversations. She's tried, very, very difficult to have some of these conversations. Very much kind of, closing her ears, head in the sand, doesn't want to talk about it. And so my client was really struggling with, how do she said, I am at max capacity. I have a child, I have a job, we're moving. If something happens to my parents and I'm not prepared, I think it's going to be over the top for me. I need to have these conversations. So she was really panicking. What's the kind of emergency plan? How do I help my parents? But not getting anywhere with her mother. And through our conversations, and this is where my kind of coaching element comes in, I believe fully that my clients have a lot of the answers themselves, if not most of the answers. So it was really about providing her a space to think through the options. And as she was thinking through it, she said, actually, my dad is a very direct communicator. And he's not happy, but he will talk about some of these subjects. And I think he may be a bit more organized. And I think that, not in a surreptitious way, but in just a practical way, I can find out some of the information that will then overlap with my mother's case. So I can be better prepared as an adult child to support them if something were to happen. So she went to her father, and she, again, did that low-hanging fruit trick where she said, look, I need to sign my daughter up for summer camps, and they are looking for, in case of emergency, names and numbers. Do you mind if I put yours down? Father emails back, yes. She replies, great, thanks. And by the way, actually, now that I'm thinking of it, I realize I don't have your neighbor's information. Would you, just in case, would you mind just sharing that with me? So he emails it back. And then I think there was one more step where she asked for one more piece of information. And in the next email, he said, actually, I have, again, this is such a crazy rapid A to B transition, but he's basically, within a few emails, he wrote back saying, actually, I have all of my estate planning information, all of my financial information, all of my emergency information in a document. It's in this drawer in my office. And next time, we see each other, I'll give it to you and make sure that you have information so you're not worried about emergency planning. A lot of aging parents, older adults, wait for someone else to initiate the conversation, including the adult children. And you may have found this in your work as well. But it was by my client having the courage to take that first step and ask that she was able to then get peace of mind, knowing that at least for her father, she had that information. There was an open flow of communication, and eventually she was able to then speak with her mother as well. So that was a brilliant way of getting the ball rolling, and then everything worked from there.
Yeah, this is really interesting because I was thinking about this the other day, and actually there's a new video on what happens next. I think it got published a couple of days ago, talking about the fact that we experts actually haven't got all the answers. The majority of the answers come from our clients, and our job is to, yes, there's technical elements that we need to add value with, but actually the value is that sounding board. And what fascinates me about that story, Emily, is the one where smart people with the skills, when it comes to at work that they use all the time, when it comes to a lot of those personal relationships, struggle to apply those same skills in those personal dynamics. Why is that, do you think?
We're just not at arm's length with our own parents. We're too close, we're too emotionally involved. And that has come up with every single client I have. I think you and I spoke about this. Every person that I've served is a professional. They have their own strong careers. If I ask them to do this research and support someone else, I have no doubt to do it. It's not rocket science. It's a certain blend of skills, but they could do it. But I've had clients ask for help on things where I've had to kind of double check their ask, because it seems so simple and straightforward, but they can't bring themselves to do it. They find it hard, and that's fine. That's what I'm here for. I'm here to help. But it is really incredible when you see how difficult it is when it's your own parents. And that includes me. I struggle with, with how to communicate with my parents sometimes and how to take things forward. This is hard because these are decades of family dynamics built up.
Yeah, absolutely. So talk to me a little bit about the first, what was really interesting is you talked about low-hanging fruit. So give me 3 other low-hanging fruits that might help you start a conversation with my dad, or help our help our viewers start conversations with their parents?
Sure. So I also mentioned using a life event. It doesn't just have to be about someone passing away. It could be the birth of a grandchild. It could be a graduation. It could be something that kind of spurs that sense of legacy or next steps. Using that as an opportunity to open up kind of bigger conversations.
So good question then. What are your thoughts? Because when you were mentioning it earlier on, you're right. Often it's at that point where there's a crisis that you start to think about stuff. Now, the interesting thing for me, when I'm thinking about planning and supporting some of our multi-generational clients, we look after mum and dad, and we look after the kids, and we look after the grandkids, typically. The more time we've got, the better we can plan. Mm-hmm. Particularly when it comes to inheritance tax and estate planning and things like that. I think the interesting thing, as you mentioned, when there's a crisis point and emotions are high, often, as you say, we don't make the best decisions in the world. So if somebody came to you and said, mum's had a fall, or would you recommend a period of just focus on mama having a fall and then plan? Or how would you manage that? It's an interesting one, isn't it?
Yeah, it's a good question. I'm a firm believer in don't let a crisis go to waste. So, for example, I worked with a client where a mother who was progressing quite quickly with her Alzheimer's, then had a fall, broke her arm, and that did allow the adult children, the sibling group, to really kind of push a bit harder on the conversation around it's not suitable for you to live at home anymore, and we really need to move forward. So there are opportunities where it's not about being opportunistic in a negative way, but it's about out of genuine care and love saying, okay, this has happened, and this is really evidence that we just need to move forward with making this decision about where's a suitable place for you to live. In other circumstances, yes, let the the immediate crisis subside and then address it later on. I think that's right. But I think it's interesting because that sense of knowing that most people won't act until there is a crisis or that sense of urgency. You can also manufacture urgency. Again, this is not about being diabolical. It's about trying to be thoughtful and strategic. So, for example, if your parent is going to have joint surgery and knee replacement, hip replacement, the recovery period isn't fun, but this is pretty straightforward surgery that most people do very well and they come out. If you want to, you could say, look, you're going to be under general anesthesia. The hospital, at least in the States, will often ask you to fill out advanced directives, medical directives, if something were to happen, who can make medical decisions. And you could say, Dad, while you're under anesthesia, I'm sure everything's going to be fine. And I'm sure your recovery is going to be fine. But just in case, if you needed some help paying bills, just while if you ended up staying in hospital a bit longer, just remind me, who do you bank with? And, it could be a number of things that you could use that as an opportunity. And again, this is not about getting access to money. It's not about doing anything diabolical. It's about using it as an
opportunity. And supporting and using that as an inflection point for a conversation that is about doing the right thing.
Absolutely.
Still,
I'm not trying to be silly about this because it can feel very real. Political situations, political upheaval. People can certainly make people think about their finances, stability, making sure that you have things in order. So that can be another opportunity to have conversations.
Yeah, and I think anything that's going to spark a planning conversation, as you say, is definitely worth doing. Emily, I've loved chatting today, and I've learned a lot about you, a lot about the conversation. I've overshared about my dad's pets. We've done everything today. Tell us a little bit about where people can find out more about you.
Sure. So the best thing to do is go to my website, which is www.guidinggenerations.co. There's no M on the end. So Guiding Generations, it's a lot of G's. And go ahead and click the book now button. And I am very happy to offer complimentary initial consultations to see if it would be the right fit. Or email me at emily@guidinggenerations.co. I'm happy to speak to everyone and see if I'm not the right person. There are a number of other professionals in this field, especially those who focus a bit more locally. I'd be happy to put you in touch with.
What is so I understand what is the right fit and what would not be the right fit for a client of yours?
I am honestly happy to help as many people as I can. I do tend to specialize in long distance caregiving because, again, some of the hurdles that we discussed. There are people who are very well versed in the intricacies and technicalities of planning for care in the UK, where I'm not as well versed. And so I'm happy to put you in touch with some of those professionals who do that.
Perfect. Thank you so much for joining us. I've really enjoyed the conversation, and thank you for watching. I hope that's been useful. It's certainly been useful for me. Have a lovely day, and we'll see you